The VIP terminal at Los Angeles International Airport gleamed under soft lights that enhanced the polished marble and gilded column accents. The aroma of expensive perfumes mingled with the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee, while an orderly line of privileged passengers awaited boarding for New York. Among them, almost unnoticed, was a young woman of medium height. She wore jeans, comfortable sneakers, and an oversized sweater that wrapped around her like a hug. Her blonde hair was partially hidden under a simple cap, and discreet sunglasses completed the carefree look. In her hands, a book of poetry that she read with genuine interest, oblivious to the occasional glances she received. Taylor Swift waited patiently for her turn, gently swaying her foot to the rhythm of a melody that only she could hear. Unlike many around him, he did not show off flashy jewelry or designer clothes in evidence. His presence was almost ethereal, silent, restrained, but somehow magnetic to anyone who paid real attention. A few seats ahead, Richard Harper impatiently consulted his Rolex watch. He wore an impeccably cut Italian suit, shiny leather shoes, and a silk tie that discreetly displayed the logo of a prestigious brand. His grey hair at his temples was perfectly combed, and his upright posture betrayed years of living with power and privilege. As the plain-looking young woman approached the first-class line, Richard couldn't hide his disdainful expression. His eyes scanned the unassuming figure from top to bottom, lingering on worn sneakers and the absence of expensive accessories. A corner smile formed on his thin lips as he turned to the assistant next to him. "It seems like anyone can buy a first-class ticket these days," he murmured, in a tone low enough to be discreet, but loud enough to be heard by those nearby. "It must be your first flight in your life." The young woman looked up from the book for a moment. A serene smile touched her lips, but she just turned the page and continued reading, as if his words were just another background noise in the constant movement of the airport. Richard, bothered by the lack of reaction, turned his attention to his phone, angrily typing messages while occasionally casting glances at the woman who didn't fit his first-class concept. When they finally began to call passengers to boarding, Taylor carefully tucked the book away in his simple bag. A stewardess approached her with a discreet smile. "Miss Swift, we can board you first if you prefer," he offered in a low voice. Taylor smiled with genuine kindness. "Thank you, but I can wait my turn like everyone else. There is no rush." Richard, who had witnessed the interaction, frowned. There was something familiar about that melodious voice, that face partially hidden by the dark glasses, but before he could fully process the information, he was called on board. As he walked down the aisle leading to the aircraft, he couldn't resist looking back one last time. The plain-looking young woman was now chatting briefly with an airport employee who was smiling respectfully, almost reverently. What Richard didn't know was that 6-hour flight would profoundly change his view of the world and of himself. Have you ever judged someone by their appearance and then found out that they were completely mistaken? How was this experience? The interior of the first-class aircraft was a sanctuary of exclusivity, leather seats that turned into beds, amenities from luxury brands, and a crew ready to cater to the smallest whims of privileged passengers. Richard settled into his seat in the front row, satisfied to once again enjoy the treatment he deserved. As he was organizing his belongings, he watched with increasing irritation the same unassuming-looking young woman approaching. To her chagrin, she stopped right next to her seat and began to store her backpack in the overhead compartment. "Is this really your place?" asked Richard, unable to hide the incredulity in his voice. "Are you sure you didn't get confused with the economy class?" Taylor lowered her gaze to meet his eyes. For a brief moment, Richard glimpsed an almost oceanic depth in that gaze. There was no anger, just a tranquility that baffled him. "Seat 2A, she replied calmly, showing her boarding pass. "Right next to you, apparently." Richard fidgeted uncomfortably. "Well, these tickets are not cheap. It must have saved for months." An enigmatic smile touched her lips as she settled in. "Each one invests in what they value, right?" Before Richard could elaborate an answer, a stewardess approached with champagne. When he recognized the passenger, his eyes widened momentarily before regaining professionalism. "Miss Swift, it's an honor to have you on board. Would you like your favorite drink?" Taylor smiled with genuine sympathy. "Just sparkling water and lemon would be perfect, thank you." Richard choked on his champagne. "Swift? Taylor Swift. Was Taylor Swift sitting next to you?" Her brain struggled to reconcile the image of the global megastar with the unassuming young woman in worn jeans and sneakers. The stewardess walked away, and an awkward silence settled between them. Richard cleared his throat, trying to find words, while Taylor calmly took the book out of her bag, preparing to continue reading. Are you Taylor Swift?" finally managed to articulate, her voice an octave higher than normal. She just nodded without looking up from the book. "It's me. I apologize for the misunderstanding. I didn't recognize her without... well, you know..." He gestured vaguely, unable to complete the sentence. "Without what?" she asked, finally looking up from the book, a genuine curiosity in her eyes. "Without all the production, the glamour," Richard stammered, noticing how shallow it sounded. "The cameras, security guards, all the paraphernalia that accompanies someone of his caliber." Taylor closed the book, keeping his finger as a bookmark. "And why do you think I'd rather travel like that when I can?" The question hung in the air, like a silent challenge. Richard, for the first time in a long time, did not have a quick and confident answer. He was used to dominating any environment with his authoritative presence and incisive opinions. But something about the serene look of this young woman he had underestimated made him feel inexplicably small. "I suppose it's exhausting to be recognized all the time," she ventured, trying to find common ground. "Not only that," Taylor replied, his melodious voice filling the space between them. "It's about being able to see the world as it really is, without him changing his behavior because of me. To remember that deep down, I'm just another person trying to find their way like everyone else." Richard adjusted his tie, suddenly aware of how much his own look screamed, "Look at me, I'm important." I was beginning to understand that there was something liberating about the simplicity that Taylor embraced. "Still," he continued, still reluctant to let go of his convictions, "someone with his success and influence, I thought I'd like to show off the achievements." Taylor smiled, a smile that was not one of superiority but of understanding. "Don't true achievements need window displays, Mr. Harper?" Richard Harper introduced himself automatically, extending his hand. "True accomplishments lie in the lives we touch, Mr. Harper, not the labels we wear." And with that simple phrase, the first seed of transformation was planted. Have you ever met someone who, despite being very successful, remained humble and authentic? What did this person teach you? As the plane gained altitude, cutting through clouds that looked like cotton suspended in the infinite sky, Richard Harper tried to regain his mental balance. The initial embarrassment gave way to a growing curiosity. How could someone with Taylor Swift's status present herself in such a way common? After the drinks were served and the plane stabilized, Richard couldn't resist resuming the conversation. Years of networking and negotiations had taught him how to turn uncomfortable situations into opportunities. "So, Miss Helena S. Swift," he began, with the calculatedly casual tone he reserved for important meetings, "I must admit that I am puzzled. Someone in your position could easily travel by private jet. Why choose a commercial flight even if it's first class?" Taylor took a small sip of his sparkling water before responding. "You make it look like I'm from another planet," he commented, with a slight tone of amusement. "Sometimes, Mr. Harper, an airplane is just a means of getting from one place to another." "Yes, but when you have resources, why not maximize comfort and privacy?" he insisted. "It's a matter of efficiency and time value." "Maybe," she replied thoughtfully, "but there's something special about sharing spaces with other people. It reminds us that we are all part of the same humanity regardless of the resources we have." Richard shook his head, a condescending smile forming on his lips. "With all due respect, this sounds like a luxury that only the truly rich can afford. philosophizing about not using their advantages. Most people struggle daily to get exactly the kind of privileges that you can simply dismiss. Rather than take offense, Taylor seemed to genuinely consider his point. "There's some truth in what you say," he admitted, surprising Richard. "Privilege allows me choices that many do not have. But that only increases my responsibility to make conscious choices, doesn't it?" "Conscious choices?" he repeated. "Like what?" "Like remembering that the real value is not in how exclusive our spaces are or how expensive our clothes are," she explained. "There's something powerful about staying connected with shared experiences, about not completely isolating yourself in a bubble of privilege." Richard let out a brief laugh. "The world belongs to those who impose themselves, Miss Helena Sanchez. Swift, those who do not show off are not remembered. It's that simple. Success needs to be seen to be recognized." Taylor tilted her head slightly, considering the statement. "Or perhaps," he replied in a soft voice, "he who has true value does not need to announce it. Perhaps the most significant success is the one that speaks for itself, through action and impact, not through display." The words hung between them like an uncomfortable truth that Richard didn't know how to rebut. In his almost 30 years in the corporate world, he had built a career and an identity based on the ostensible demonstration of success. His expensive suit, his unique watch, his commanding posture. Everything had been carefully cultivated to project an image of power and importance. "This works well for you because it has already gained worldwide recognition," he argued, trying to regain control of the conversation. "For the rest of us ordinary mortals, perception is reality. If you want to be treated as successful, you need to look successful." Taylor watched him for a moment as if he was really considering his perspective. "You know what's interesting, Mr. Harper? Before fame, when I was just a teenager dreaming in Nashville, I learned something valuable from my father. He said, 'Character is who you are when no one is looking.'" She paused, her eyes shining with a wisdom that transcended her age. "The real question may be, if no one was looking, if there was no status or recognition involved, would you still do what you do? Would you still be who you are?" The question hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. It was simple, almost childish in its formulation, but deeply uncomfortable in its implications. If no one was looking, if there were no admiration, envy, or deference involved, who would Richard Harper be? "Life isn't that simple," he deflected, adjusting his tie in an unconscious gesture of defense. "We are social beings. Recognition from others shapes who we are." "That's true," Taylor agreed, surprising him again. "But there are different types of recognition, don't you think? The one based on fear or envy, and the one based on genuine respect and connection." Richard felt exposed, as if this young woman he had underestimated was seeing through the carefully constructed layers of his public persona, right into the insecurities he didn't even like to admit. "Which one are you looking for, Mr. Harper?" she asked gently, without judgment in her voice. "And more importantly, which one actually fills the void at the end of the day?" The cabin lights dimmed softly, signaling the start of meal service. For Richard, it was a momentary relief from the conversation that forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own choices and motivations. As the aroma of gourmet food filled the room, Richard surreptitiously watched as Taylor interacted with the crew, always with kindness, always looking into each person's eyes, always sincerely thanking them. There was no sign of the arrogance in her behavior that he would expect from someone of his status. And for the first time in many years, Richard Harper felt a twinge of doubt about the path he had chosen. What kind of recognition do you seek in your life? The one based on appearances, or the one based on who you really are? The meal service passed in relative silence. Richard was immersed in contradictory thoughts, occasionally casting glances at his traveling companion, who was now quietly flipping through a magazine. Taylor Swift, the real Taylor Swift, sitting next to her, dressed like an ordinary college student, without the slightest concern for the image she projected. After the dishes were collected, Richard felt an almost visceral need to resume the conversation. Her words kept echoing in his mind, challenging convictions he had carried for decades. "So," he began, clearly breaking the silence, "you mentioned impact. What kind of impact really matters to you?" Taylor seemed genuinely interested in the question, putting the magazine aside. "The kind that stays when all the lights go out," she replied. "The one that touches individual lives in ways I may never know." "That looks like inaccurate," Richard commented. "In the business world, we measure impact in hard numbers: profit, market growth, shareholder value. And do these numbers make you feel accomplished at the end of the day?" she asked with sincere curiosity, without a trace of judgment. Richard opened his mouth to automatically answer yes, of course he did, but something stopped him. The question deserved an honest answer. "They used to," he finally admitted. "Every new million, every new contract, every new recognition was like as a validation that I was on the right track." He paused, surprised by his own sincerity. "But lately," urged Taylor gently when he didn't continue. Richard took a deep breath. "Lately, it seems like I always need more. A bigger success, a more lucrative contract, a more luxurious car. It's as if..." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "As if I were chasing something that keeps moving away no matter how much I run." Taylor's gaze was one of pure understanding, without pity or superiority. "I know that feeling," she confessed. "When I put out my first album and it was successful, I thought, that's it, now I'm happily ever after. Then came the second, the third, and I realized that external satisfaction is always temporary." "Exactly," Richard agreed, surprised that he was establishing a genuine connection. "So what made the difference for you?" Taylor reflected for a moment. "I realized I was looking in the wrong place. External validation, applause, awards, sales numbers is like salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you are. And the alternative would be finding purpose in authentic relationships, in the small differences we make daily. To use whatever platform we have, big or small, to leave the world a little better than we found it." Richard looked out the window, watching the carpet of clouds below them, looking as solid as the ground he had left behind. "My ex-wife used to say something similar," he commented, his voice lower. "She always complained that I was too busy building an empire to realize that our castle was falling apart." "And was she right?" asked Taylor softly. "I thought she didn't understand the pressures I faced, the responsibility to maintain our lifestyle," he replied defensively. Then, after a pause, "But yes, I think deep down she was right. When the divorce was finalized, I realized I had an impressive bank account and no one really important to share it with." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but contemplative. Taylor didn't fill the space with platitudes or unsolicited advice. He just allowed his own words to resonate. "You know what's ironic?" continued Richard, feeling a strange release in sharing vulnerabilities with this almost stranger. "My son graduated 3 weeks ago, Princeton. I was there, of course, in the front row. I took pictures, gave the gift, gave the speech of a proud father at the celebration dinner." "That sounds wonderful," Taylor commented. "It should be, shouldn't it?" A sad smile formed on his lips. "But before I left, he said to me, 'Dad, this is the first time I've seen you actually stop for more than 2 hours since I was 12. He was right. I was physically present in your life, but mentally, always in the next deal, in the next contract." Taylor nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding. Recognizing this is already an important step. A lot of people never get to that point of self-reflection. "What's the use of reflection now?" asked Richard with a hint of bitterness. "Time has passed. My son is an adult. My marriage is over." "Do you know what I've learned writing songs about my mistakes and regrets?" she asked, leaning slightly toward him. "That it is never too late to start a new chapter. The past is written, yes, but the future?" His eyes lit up. "The future is still a blank page." Richard felt something awakening inside him, a small spark of possibility that he hadn't experienced in a long time. What if I don't know where to start? Start with what's right in front of you, she replied simply. Opportunities for connection, kindness, and genuine presence are everywhere at all times. We're having one right now. It was true, Richard realized. Here he was, having the most authentic conversation in years. Not with an expensive life coach or a therapist, but with a world-famous singer he had disrespected less than 2 hours ago. "Why are you being so kind to me?" he asked abruptly. "I was completely disrespectful to you at the beginning of this flight." Taylor's smile was genuine and warm. "Because everyone deserves the chance to be seen beyond their first impression. And because sometimes the most meaningful conversations arise from the most unlikely encounters." Richard felt a lump in his throat and looked away, feigning interest in the landscape outside. Something was changing inside him, slowly but inexorably, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface. "Thank you," he said finally, the words barely audible. "For what?" she asked. "For seeing myself beyond my first impression." Her smile was answer enough. Have you ever had a conversation with a stranger that changed your perspective on something important? How did this interaction impact your life afterwards? The next few hours passed in a mixture of meaningful conversation and comfortable silences. Richard found himself sharing stories from his childhood, the overbearing father who was never satisfied, the constant pressure to perform and overcome, the implicit message that value was something to be earned through external achievement. Taylor, for his part, spoke about the challenges of growing up under public scrutiny, making mistakes with millions watching, and the painful but necessary process of separating his identity from his public image. "The hardest thing," she confessed as the plane began its gradual descent, "was learning that I can't control what others think of me. I can only be true to my values and let my actions speak for themselves." Richard nodded, absorbing the words. "I've spent my whole life trying to control how I'm perceived," he admitted. "Every detail calculated to project success, power, competence. It's exhausting." "And does it work?" she asked. "It works to get what I thought I wanted," he replied after reflecting. "But to get what I really need, I'm not so sure." The captain announced that they were beginning the final approach to JFK Airport. Richard looked out the window, glimpsing the outlines of New York City looming on the horizon, a maze of lights and possibilities. "You know what's funny?" he commented, turning to Taylor. "I'm in New York at least twice a month on business. I know the best restaurants, the most exclusive hotels. I have access to the most prestigious circles. But I can't remember the last time that I walked through Central Park, or I visited a museum for pleasure, not to impress a customer." Taylor smiled. "It's never too late to start." "You're right," he agreed, sensing a resolution forming. "My meeting only starts tomorrow afternoon. Maybe I should." He was interrupted by the sound of excited voices. As the plane taxied to the terminal, several passengers in the business class area had noticed Taylor's presence. Some pointed discreetly, others took pictures in disguise. "Does that happen often?" asked Richard, watching people's reactions. "Sort of," she replied with a resigned smile. "It's part of the job." A middle-aged man approached down the hallway, clearly nervous but determined. "Sorry to bother," he began, addressing Taylor, "but my daughter is your biggest fan. She's going through chemotherapy right now, and her songs have been what keeps her going strong." Taylor's face lit up with genuine empathy. "What's her name?" "Sophia," replied the man, emotion evident in his voice. "She's 12. Taylor opened her purse and pulled out a small notebook. With a pen borrowed from Richard, who watched the scene with increasing fascination, he wrote a personalized message to Sophia, asking for details about her interests and including words of encouragement that clearly came from the heart. When he handed the signed note to the man, he had tears in his eyes. "This will mean the world to her. Thank you for being who you are." As the man walked away, visibly moved, Richard felt something inexplicable in his chest, a mixture of admiration and a pang of shame for his initial behavior. "You handle it with such grace," he commented, I would have found a way to avoid interaction or delegated it to an assistant. Each person carries their own story, Taylor replied simply. Sometimes a small gesture can make a difference that we will never know how to measure. If I can offer this, why wouldn't I? The plane finally stopped at the terminal and passengers began to stand up, collecting their belongings. Richard realized that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't eager to check emails or make calls as soon as he could use his phone. Instead, he felt present, conscious, as if he were waking up from a long trance. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Harper," Taylor said, extending his hand. "I hope you find what you're looking for in New York." Richard shook her hand, feeling a strange reluctance to end this unexpected encounter. "The pleasure was mine, really, and please call me Richard." "Richard," she repeated with a smile. "Enjoy Central Park." As they walked down the arrivals hall, Richard noticed how the airport staff reacted to Taylor's presence. Not with the tense deference he usually elicited, but with genuine smiles and looks of sincere admiration. In the arrivals hall, a small group of fans had formed. Somehow the news of his arrival had spread. What Richard witnessed next was a lesson in humility and authenticity. Taylor greeted each fan individually, not in a hurry or impatience, but with a total presence, listening to their stories, answering their questions, thanking them for their support, with words that clearly came from the heart. A low-key security guard kept order, but there wasn't the intimidating barrier Richard would expect from a celebrity of that caliber. Instead, there was a genuine, human exchange, the same one he had experienced during the flight. Suddenly, Richard felt deeply ashamed of his initial assumptions, of his hasty judgment based on outward appearances. Here was a woman who could easily isolate herself in a bubble of privilege, who could justifiably use her fame as a shield against the world, and yet deliberately chose to remain accessible, authentic, connected. As he watched the scene from a distance, one of Taylor's phrases during the flight echoed in his mind. "True success is not in what we accumulate, but in the positive impact we create." In that moment, Richard Harper, a successful executive, a ruthless negotiator, a man who had defined value through status symbols, felt as if he were seeing the world through a new lens. And for the first time in decades, he felt the genuine desire for change. Have you ever witnessed someone famous or influential demonstrating genuine humility and kindness? How did that affect your perception of that person? The cab drove through the busy streets of Manhattan as Richard stared out the window, absorbed in thought. The city lights looked different tonight, not just symbols of power and wealth as I used to see them, but silent witnesses to millions of human stories intertwining. Instead of heading directly to the luxury hotel where he always stayed, Richard made an impulsive request to the driver. "Can you drop me off at the south entrance of Central Park, please?" The driver nodded, adjusting the route. A few minutes later, Richard found himself standing on the sidewalk, watching the expanse of green open up in front of him, an oasis of tranquility in the midst of urban chaos that he rarely had time to appreciate. He began to walk along the park's illuminated paths, his executive suitcase contrasting with the relaxed atmosphere of the early evening. Families strolled, couples walked hand in hand, street performers performed for small, enchanted audiences. "Senior Harper," Richard turned, surprised to hear his name. A young woman watched him with a hesitant smile. It took a few seconds before he recognized her. Rebecca, a former intern at his company who had worked in the marketing department for about 2 years. "Rebecca, right?" he replied, trying to remember more details about her. Had he been a good boss? Had he even paid enough attention to know? "Yes, that's right." She seemed genuinely surprised that he remembered. "I didn't expect to see him here, especially, well, strolling through the park on a Tuesday night." There was a note of curiosity in his voice, as if the image of Richard Harper laid back in Central Park was something inconceivable. "I'm trying something different," he admitted with a smile that surprised himself. "How are you? Where are you working now?" Her face lit up. I started my own digital marketing agency focused on small businesses. It's going surprisingly well." "This is wonderful," Richard replied, realizing that he really felt what he was saying. "I always thought you had potential." It was a gentle lie. The truth is that he barely remembered her beyond her name. The old Richard would probably have ended the conversation right there, with an excuse about urgent appointments. But something had changed. "Do you have a few minutes to have a coffee?" he asked, surprising them both. "I'd love to hear more about your business." The astonishment on Rebecca's face was almost comical. Of course, there's a great coffee shop just around the corner." As they walked side by side, Richard felt a strange lightness. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about appearances or what I would gain from this interaction. It was simply present. In the cozy little coffee shop, sitting at a table in the corner, Richard listened truthfully as Rebecca shared her entrepreneurial journey. The challenges, the victories, the lessons learned. He asked genuine questions, offered advice when asked, and even admitted mistakes he had made in his own career. "You know what's weirder?" Rebecca commented after almost an hour of conversation. "When I worked at Harper Enterprises, you were almost a mythical figure. Everyone talked about his relentless determination, his intolerance for failure, his relentless pursuit of results." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. "Was that your reputation? A boss feared instead of respected? And that scared you?" he asked calmly. Rebecca considered the question. "In fact, it made us insecure. We always wondered if we were good enough, if a single failure could end our careers. Stressful." Taylor's words echoed in her mind. What kind of recognition do you seek? The one based on fear or envy, or the one based on genuine respect and connection? "I'm sorry about that," Richard said, the words coming out with surprising sincerity. "I think I confused results with value for a long time." Rebecca studied it for a moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "If I may say, Mr. Harper, you seem different today." Richard smiled, feeling strangely exposed and yet comfortable. "Let's say I had an illuminating conversation on the plane. When they finally said goodbye, Richard surprised himself again by offering help if Rebecca needed mentorship or advice to grow her business. The look of gratitude and genuine respect in her eyes, so different from the fear or calculated deference he was used to, touched something deep inside him. Walking towards the hotel, Richard took his cell phone out of his pocket and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He called his son, for no specific reason, just to talk. "Dad?" The surprise in Michael's voice was evident. "Is everything okay? Did something happen?" The fact that a casual call from a father to a son seemed so unusual as to signal an emergency was another needle in Richard's heart. "All is well," he replied, feeling the strange wetness in his eyes. "I just wanted to know how you are, and maybe check if that offer to spend a weekend fishing in the lake still stands." The momentary silence on the other end of the line was followed by an emotionally charged response. "It always has been, Dad. It always has been." That night, in a luxurious hotel room overlooking Manhattan, Richard Harper didn't check email, review contracts, strategize for the next day's meeting. Instead, he sat on the porch watching the city lights, and for the first time in years, he simply allowed himself to be. No titles, no achievements, no need to prove his worth. Your phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from Rebecca, a photo of them at the coffee shop, shared on her professional page with the caption, "Surreal moment, drinking coffee and getting mentorship from the legendary Richard Harper." Some people really surprise you when you least expect it. The words elicited a genuine smile. Legendary Richard Harper. For so long he had pursued legends, of success, of power, of recognition. But who was he really behind these labels? Taylor Swift, one of the most famous women on the planet, wore simple clothes and traveled on commercial flights without fear of looking ordinary. Rebecca had abandoned the security of a corporate job to pursue her passion. His own son valued moments of connection far more than the empire Richard had worked so hard to build. Perhaps the real power was not in impressing, but in connecting, not in accumulating, but in sharing, not in appearing successful, but in being significant. The next day, Richard entered the meeting room without his usual superiority armor. He listened more than he spoke. He recognized good ideas, regardless of who proposed them. He led not through intimidation, but through inspiration. And when one of the young analysts, clearly nervous about being in the CEO's presence, accidentally poured water on his documents, Richard didn't react with the irritation everyone expected. Instead, he offered his own handkerchief and a word of encouragement. The look of surprise and relief on the young man's face was a small revolution, the first in many moments that, together, would begin to rewrite the story of who Richard Harper really was. As he flew back to Los Angeles on Friday, he reflected on how a chance encounter of a few hours had triggered such a profound transformation. It had not been a dramatic ray of illumination, but a seed planted through simple words spoken truthfully. True achievement lies in the lives we touch, not the labels we wear. Taylor's smile, her kindness to every person she met, her ability to remain genuine in a world designed to prize image over substance, all of this had revealed possibilities that Richard didn't even know still existed within him. In his pocket, a handwritten note he had just bought at the airport store was waiting to be mailed. "Dear Sophia, I learned from a mutual friend that you are fighting an uphill battle. I want you to know that your courage inspires more people than you realize. Stay strong. Richard Harper." He didn't know Sophia. She wouldn't know who he was. There was nothing to be gained by this small gesture. And that was exactly why, for the first time in decades, Richard felt he was finally doing something that really mattered. What kind of legacy would you like to leave? One based on what you owned or one based on how you made people feel? 3 months later, the VIP terminal at Los Angeles International Airport looked strangely familiar and completely different at the same time. Richard Harper adjusted the strap of his leather backpack, a practical replacement for the executive briefcase he used to carry, as he watched the movement of passengers. He wore well-cut jeans, a simple button-down shirt, and comfortable shoes, a look that reflected the inner transformation he had experienced since that fateful flight. It wasn't a complete rejection of professionalism, but a conscious choice to prioritize authenticity over appearances. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of change. After much reflection, Richard had implemented a Family Friday policy at Harper Enterprises, encouraging employees to finish work early to spend time with their loved ones. He had started a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from underserved communities, offering not only advice but also seed investments in promising ideas. And, perhaps most significantly, she had spent an entire weekend at the lake with Michael, fishing, talking, reconnecting in ways that felt both strange and deeply familiar. Weird how life works in circles, isn't it? The melodious voice behind him made Richard turn around, an involuntary smile forming on his face. Taylor Swift, dressed similarly to last time, jeans, comfy sweater, understated cap, stared at him with a glint of recognition in her eye. Miss Helena Sanchez. "Swift," he greeted, extending his hand. "Or can I say Taylor now that we've shared a transcontinental journey and an existential crisis?" She laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Taylor, definitely. And you seem different, Richard." "I feel different," he admitted, pointing to the empty chairs nearby. "I have a few minutes before boarding if you want to catch up on the latest hits from your tour." As they sat down, Richard noticed how their behavior had changed. Where once I would have automatically assessed the value or status of anyone with whom I interacted, I now felt a genuine curiosity, a desire for connection that transcended strategic utility. "I'm actually coming home after a few days in the studio," Taylor explained. "And you? Business in Los Angeles?" "A mixture," he replied. "I closed a few contracts, but I also visited a school in downtown where we are implementing a business mentoring program for teenagers." Taylor tilted her head, a curious smile on her lips. That sounds like an interesting development. Richard laughed softly. Let's say that certain conversations have the power to plant seeds that continue to grow long after the initial meeting. It makes me very happy to hear, she said sincerely. You know, most people go their whole lives without questioning the values they have absorbed. The mere fact of being willing to reevaluate, this is already extraordinary. Extraordinary? Richard shook his head. I don't know, it seems more human, like I'm finally peeling off layers of armor I didn't even realize I was wearing. They talked for a few minutes about subtle and profound changes, how Richard was rebuilding his relationship with his son, how he had restructured some company policies to prioritize well-being over relentless productivity, how he was relearning to find pleasure in small moments. And most surprisingly, he concluded with a wry smile, the company's results have improved. It seems that treating people as, well, people rather than assets is even good for business. Who would have thought? Taylor smiled. Authenticity has a power that imposition will never have. When the boarding was announced, they both stood up. But before they said goodbye, Richard hesitated, as if to say something more. You know, he began, I've always thought that people like you, celebrities, public figures, lived in a completely different world than the rest of us. But that conversation we had, it made me realize that deep down, we're all looking for the same essentials: connection, purpose, the sense that our lives mean something other than external achievements. Taylor nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding. Fame, wealth, status, they can change the circumstances of life, but not the fundamental needs of the human heart. Richard reached out for a final grip. Thank you. Not just for that conversation, but for living according to their values. It's rarer than it should be. Taylor accepted the handshake, but then did something unexpected, pulled him into a brief hug. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unlikely encounters. Safe riddance, Richard Harper. As he walked to the gate, Richard reflected on how a single encounter can alter the course of a life. Not through dramatic events or extraordinary revelations, but through simple truth shared at the right time, when the heart is ready to hear it. Settling into his seat in first class, Richard noticed a nervous young woman being guided by the stewardess to the seat next to his. She looked around with wide eyes, clearly out of place in the luxurious surroundings. First time in first class? He asked gently. She nodded, a blush coloring her cheeks. I got a promotion at work. I thought about giving myself a gift. The old Richard would have offered a polite smile before isolating himself in his own world of emails and reports. But the man he was becoming saw something different, an opportunity for connection, a moment to make someone feel valued rather than judged. Congratulations on the promotion, he said with a genuine smile. It's Katie, right? Noting the name on the boarding pass she held. I'm Richard, and if I may suggest, the champagne they serve here is excellent for celebrations. The grateful smile that lit up her face was worth more than any lucrative deal Richard had ever struck. As the plane taxied onto the runway, he found himself thinking about how, for so many years, he had mistaken the means for the end, accumulating symbols of success while losing sight of the purpose behind it all. The truth has always been there, hidden under layers of misdirected social expectations and ambitions. A person's real value is not in the applause they receive, the possessions they accumulate, or the power they wield, but in the way they make others feel, the lives they touch, the love they share. And as the plane gained altitude, Richard Harper, no longer just a successful businessman but an evolving human being, felt a deep gratitude for that unexpected encounter that had planted the seed of the most significant transformation of his life. An encounter that taught him that true greatness rarely wears designer labels or seeks applause. True greatness often walks among us quietly, making a difference not by what it appears to be, but by the way it makes the world feel a little more human, a little kinder, a little more hopeful. And in the grand scheme of life, perhaps that's the only measure of success that really matters. Have you ever had a chance encounter that profoundly changed the way you see the world? How did this change manifest itself in your daily actions?